There's been no written explanation or detailed justification, no evidence of due diligence or evaluation to explain the proposed termination of UOD. In addition, there's no curriculum, budget proposal, or teacher training plan offered as a replacement program. I urge the school committee to adopt Mr. Levy's motion and set the expectation that the NPS administration will find a consensus approach to inclusion education. Partnership. We have already received financial pledges of support. We will raise private contributions because we know that this year's budget means painful cuts to teaching positions. By doing this, we are demonstrating our commitment to NPS and pledging to continue UOD for another year. UOD's allocation from NPS would then be 0.01% of the school budget. Participation, specifically the direct participation by people with disabilities. Who better to talk about disabilities than people who live the experience every day? Our speakers who identify as people with asthma, autism, blindness, deafness, diabetes, epilepsy, learning challenges, physical disabilities, and intellectual disabilities are part of the magic of UOD. After a UOD presentation, kids take ownership of becoming allies, not because an adult instructs them, but because they have the opportunity to learn and engage authentically. Now is not the time to silence the voices of people with disabilities who have represented themselves in the classrooms of Newton Public Schools. I've had the opportunity to speak with several of you, and I thank you for your time. Though through these conversations, I believe that most of the school committee does not agree with the decision to shutter a successful program without an appropriate review. Don't let the story be that the Newton School Committee voted to end understanding our differences despite no systematic, detailed review.
30 seconds.
Reference to teaching about disabilities, bringing disabilities in-house. Let the headline be that the school committee decided to keep understanding our differences in our schools and chose to affirm the importance of hearing people with disabilities speaking for themselves. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Up next, we have Joseph Quintalina. Apologies for the name pronunciation. Joseph. Is he unmuted, Stephen?
Hi, I'm Joseph Quintanilla. My apologies. I'm blind, so it's a little slower in getting the mute undone in the video. I live in Burlington at 21 Skilton Lane, but I've lived in Newton. I've worked in Newton. I shop and dine in Newton. I'm a trustee at Understanding Our Differences, and more importantly, I've been a guest speaker at almost every elementary school in Newton over the last 5 years in the blindness track. I am also blind and Latino, and I have to tell you that most of the discrimination I faced in the 46 years of my life has been because I'm blind. When I was 5, 6, 7, 8 years old is when it started. When kids in school would hit me in the head that were sitting behind me, and I'd turn around and I would ask, "Hey, stop that, don't do that." And all the kids behind me would laugh and say, no, it was him, it was her. When I would drop something, kids would kick it away so I couldn't find it. And unfortunately, that discrimination didn't stop. As an adult, I am discriminated almost on a weekly basis. When I go into a retail store and I ask for assistance to help me do my grocery shopping or find some articles of clothing, I will often get this response: "We don't have that service for you people. You need to bring somebody on your own." When I'm at a restaurant and I'm with a sighted person, a server will ask the sighted person, "What is he having?" When I go to a doctor's office and a volunteer might escort me from the main building to the doctor's office, they'll ask the volunteer, "What is his name?" When I get to speak to the kids at UOD, I hear from the teachers and the parents how engaged they are in what I'm saying, how they ask these questions that I wish adults would ask, because the questions they ask are genuine and heartfelt, and they're really curious. And my answers will explain to them that, yes, my eyes don't work, but my cane will help me navigate. My eyes don't work to read, but my fingers do. That I cook, that I clean, that I'm a owner. I'm married, I run marathons. I'm just like their parents. I'm just like their teachers. It demystifies their ideas of people with disabilities. I'm not someone to be pitied. I'm not someone to be hailed as a superhero. I'm just someone who likes and enjoys the same things that they did when they were kids, that their parents do as adults.
You have
And I
30
just do it in
minutes.
different ways. So I really urge you to keep UOD. If inclusion has to include people with disabilities, I hope you keep this program going, because it will be an injustice for the students if you don't. It will be a huge injustice to kids with disabilities if this is not around, so they won't be bullied. And let's stop the perpetuation of picking on people with disabilities who are vulnerable. And let's keep this program going so that everyone can be treated equal and respected with dignity.
Thank you. Up next, we have Melissa Moncrusis. Apologies if I mispronounced.
Hi, thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak this evening. I am a parent to a first grader at Countryside and the co-president of the PTO. I would also like to note that 236 of our parents, which is the majority of our families, signed a letter in support of restoring funding to maintain current class size. I am speaking tonight to implore the school committee to reverse the classroom cuts that would increase our class sizes in grades 3 through 5. At Countryside specifically, our 4th grade classrooms are slated to have 28 and 29 students. During these past 2 school years, the effects of the pandemic on our children are becoming more and more evident. During kindergarten, my son started to have behaviors that were sudden and surprising to us and his teachers. We were so fortunate to have a classroom teacher with an appropriate number of students, a full-time kindergarten teaching assistant, and an SEL interventionist to come together and support our child and our family during this time. Our students have significant academic and social emotional needs that are far greater than they were pre-COVID. Now is not the time to increase class sizes and diminish supports. When teachers are responsible for teaching large classes, this greatly reduces the ability to provide small group and individualized instruction. If we cut these supports now, we are in for far greater need in a few short years. Our children deserve to have the best education in order to compensate and recover from the effects of the pandemic. As a former teacher, I have seen how detrimental it is to have large class sizes, especially at the elementary level. Gone are the days of sitting in rows, listening to lectures, taking notes, and regurgitating information for quizzes and tests. 21st century learning demands that we teach our kids to be collaborative learners and critical thinkers. Small group work, collaboration, discussion, and individual attention are essential in today's classroom. If you have not taught or worked in a classroom, I cannot explain how difficult it is to have 28 children in front of you, needing your best instruction and attention, 28 parent-teacher conferences twice a year, 28 report cards, more phone calls, emails, and more demands on teacher time. I implore the mayor and the school committee to adopt any and all measures that will restore funding to MPS. I specifically think Mr. Bresky's proposal is sound and the way to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Up next, we have Debbie Breacham. Baricham.
It's Berrickman.
Thank you. Berrickman.
Good evening. My name is Debbie Barrickman, 102 Pearl Street. Dear school committee members, Mayor Fuller, and Interim Superintendent Smith, I am a former parent coordinator for Understanding Our Differences at Lincoln Elliott and am currently co-president of the UOD board. I appreciate your consideration of maintaining Understanding Our Differences in the 2023-24 budget by supporting Paul Levy's motion. At a time when DEI efforts are being prioritized, UOD is needed as a leader in the Newton Public Schools, now more than ever, to be at the table to discuss best practices. Newton, our home base, should be proud to affiliate with such a highly regarded, distinguished program that is offered across so many school districts. We have always been a leader in this field, and we should want to retain this reputation. I discovered UOD when my son was in kindergarten, and we had just received his diagnosis of autism. I can't imagine what my son's experience would have been like without UOD. He has never experienced bullying, and he has always felt to be a welcome and appreciated member of the school community, and UOD helped to give him a voice. UOD teaches empathy and respect for differences, to embrace that we all have strengths and we all have challenges. And this is done best by exposing our children to individuals who tell their own stories, our unit speakers. I have always felt so proud of the UOD program in our schools, to laud the progressive thinking and collaboration of teachers and parents with the UOD staff. Over the years, hundreds of parents have been involved in this program to its great benefit, and it is in the best interest of the Newton Public Schools to keep parents engaged in these efforts and in our schools. It would be a travesty to remove this curriculum without further in-depth and well-rounded discussion. I strongly encourage those of you on the school committee who haven't already done so, as well as the mayor, to go into the classroom to see our curriculum being presented. There is no substitute for seeing how students interact so positively and enthusiastically with our materials, and especially our speakers. I implore you to please support Paul Levy's motion to maintain UOD in the budget.
You have 30 seconds.
It is so critical to our community. And I can attest that UOD has received pledges to raise $31,750 per Mr. Levy's motion to match the funding from Newton Public Schools. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Up next, we have Kim Smith.
Hi, I'm also the daughter of an educator and the mother of one. I have a high school kid and I live in Chestnut Hill. I don't know of one person who hasn't experienced very deleterious negative effects from this pandemic, not one family. Our students are in the middle of an unprecedented teen mental health crisis. Some of the facts are, for example, non-fatal self-harm has risen 62% for teens and suicide in the last decade. At the high school, as I've spoken before, we're at max enrollment. We have class sizes close to 30, which is when my oldest daughter started, they were 25. We've seen class loads for teachers go from 100 to 200 in just a few years. And these are the teachers that are the front lines of the behavioral health pandemic. According to the mayor's forecast, demographic forecast that she sent out, we're going to have increased enrollment through 2025, not including families such as mine who came from the private schools. Newton high schools have always historically undercounted families like ours. I'm therefore asking for absolutely no cuts, no downsizing, no defunding of our schools. We don't expect you to solve the mental health, social, emotional, and academic issues of all our students. You know, you're human, but we certainly don't expect you to pull the rug out from under our feet. Communities such as music and art are extremely valuable and important. Dan Rubin, the head of guidance at Newton South, led a seminar on that, a lecture recently in the last year on how important these communities are for normalcy, support, and friendship. You can't, I'm asking you, no cuts to any of these communities, or the responsibility is yours for the repercussion, and history will show it's a big mistake. We expect you to be stewards of our schools. No downsizing, no defunding, as the proposals from Paul Levy, Rick Lephoff, Susan Albright, Chris Brzezinski, I can't pronounce your last name, sorry, and many others have shown these are avoidable cuts. And when they ask for compromises, we're being asked to compromise our children's social, emotional health and mental health. And when we ask you for compromises, Mayor Fuller and Newton Public Schools, we get threats. This is not acceptable. We expect you to be stewards of our schools, not just to keep the lights on, but to keep the excellence going. And please don't pull the rug out from underneath our kids. Not now. Thank you.
Thank you. Up next, we have Amy Davenport.
Hi, my name is Amy Davenport and I live at 86 Park Avenue. During the April school vacation week, a parent-led petition to restore proposed NPS cuts received 1,107 signatures from Newton residents and families. I shared the 1,100 plus digital signatures we collected with you earlier today. Petitioners came from all schools, school levels, and wards. This was a purely grassroots effort shared by word of mouth, parent to parent, caregiver to caregiver, and neighbor to neighbor. We had no website, no formal organizational structure or leader. We were united instead by our commitment to Newton's kids, our fears about the real impact of the proposed budget-based cuts on their future, and our firm belief in the pillars of equity and excellence Newton purports to prioritize. We implore you tonight to employ any and all financial options available to alleviate the proposed fiscal year 24 staffing reductions. Co-authored by elementary and secondary parents, the petition urges school committee members not to approve the budget-based staffing reductions. In particular, we ask you to support the April 12th memo authored by Ward 2 Representative Chris Bresky, proposing adjustments to other NPS budget line items that would shield our children from the harmful outcomes of the currently proposed cuts. Proposed cuts to elementary staffing based on the budget will result in grades 3 through 5 classrooms of up to 29 students, all of whom were in pre-K, kindergarten, and first grade when COVID struck. Leadership has also been forced to propose middle school cuts that will increase team sizes to 100 students, resulting in larger class sizes in all grades and subject areas. Reduced classroom staffing also decreases support and special education personnel across all levels. Larger class sizes, especially at the elementary level, have been proven to reduce student achievement and have a particularly adverse effect on historically marginalized student populations. Earlier this week, I shared with you data from Project STAR, the Student-Teacher Achievement Ratio Study, the most famous and rigorous study of how smaller class sizes result in improved student achievement with gains that persist for years, and conversely, deficits for students in larger class sizes. Beyond that substantive body of research that shows how large class sizes adversely affect student growth, my personal experiences in the classroom every day as a career educator affirm the critical importance of the relationships kids build with their teachers, counselors, support staff, and all members of their school community. Every Newton child deserves the opportunity to be seen, heard, and known by the educators who work with them. Every touch point between the student and the educator allows educators to meet all students' needs and improves each child's ability to succeed. The proposed budget cuts threaten our faculty and staff's ability to connect with their students and our students' ability to foster positive relationships with one another. Our budget should reflect our values. The operating override may have failed, but that does not mean we have to fail our kids. We urge you to prioritize the recovery and growth of NPS students. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you to all of our public commenters tonight. We very much appreciate hearing your perspective. Our public comment period is now closed, and we will turn to our interim superintendent update.
Thank you, Tamika. I also want to thank the elementary strings, our students, community members, parents who again performed outside this evening. Again, it is just one of the reasons that Newton is what it is, has wonderful programs, offers students so many opportunities. So again, I would like to thank them. I would also like to thank, and I've done this at each and every meeting, all of the community members, the parents that not only take their time to speak during community comment, but truly when I say hundreds of emails advocating for many different positions, what it tells me is a community is very special, regardless of the outcomes when you are engaged in the process. So I have read each and every one of those emails, those letters, the concerns, and I share the concerns that everyone has certainly shared with us. And I want to end tonight. I know there's quite a bit on the agenda, but when I last left here, I talked to all of you just before vacation about going to a very special event at Newton North High School, the GSA To Be Glad Day on April 14th. And I really want to take a moment to thank faculty advisors, Melanie Pennison, Lisa Goldwaite-Wright, our Newton North High School faculty, Principal Turner, and most importantly, I was from GSA for their preparation, their presentation, and the visiting guests who answered questions from our student audience, and finally performing, as I did share that evening, I wasn't sure, but the 2011 recording of Born This Way, truly to the delight of our student audience. And what I would like to share with everybody is I've never been so proud to be your superintendent, to sit in that audience, to listen to the dialogue, the conversation. They are beyond their years, and I'm talking about our students, wise, a wonderful audience, probing questions. It was an education for myself, I'm sure for many of the faculty there, and certainly for our students in the very best way. So I told you I would report to you. I had an opportunity to talk to many of you over the holiday break. And again, I just want to thank, and it isn't, again, when you talk about, you know, the GSA cultural event, there are many of those events that I did not have the opportunity to go to, but if it's anything like that, it is such a valuable way for me to spend my time, and I will try to get to as many as I can in my last couple of months. So thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Any questions for Kathy about a topic in her update? Great. All right, so we will continue on to our consent agenda. There are a few items tonight. We have approval of the Countryside Design Enrollment and Space Program, approval of the FY 23 Scoville Trust or Scoville Fund transfer. This is a memo that Amy Mistro forwarded to us seeking a single year transfer of $70,000 from the Scoville Trust to award to the 2023 graduates of both Newton North and Newton South, a joint recommendation from Amy and the treasurer Ron Mendes for the city of Newton. And the last item on the consent agenda is the approval of an Underwood PTO one-day liquor license. Oh, and approval of minutes for October 21st, 27th, and November 7th. Anyone would like to remove an item from the consent agenda? Is there a motion to vote in approval of the consent agenda items? Sure, Paul.
So moved.
Motion by Paul. Is there a second? Thank you, Rajiv. Ward 1,
Yes.
Ward 2,
Yes.
Ward 3,
Yes.
Ward 4, yes. Ward 5,
Yes.
Ward 6,
Yes.
Ward 7,
Yes.
Ward 8 is not here at present. Mayor Fuller.
Yes.
All right, that motion passes unanimously. Thank you, everyone. All right, and we will continue on to our items for discussion and updates. First up, we have an update on the composition and initial progress of the calendar working group. And Kathy, I believe I'll throw that one to you.
Thank you very much. I hope I'm joined by Amping Shen and Chris Bresky, who have been members appointed by you, Madam Chair, for our calendar working group. So presently, I know in front of you, you have our working group members. You can see that we have staff, we have students, we have administrators, a dean of students, a math teacher, we have 2 school committee members, we have a number of parents, some that serve as both a teacher aide in the district and also a parent in the district. We also have supporting on the district level, myself, Director of Communications, Julie McDonough, and Dr. Caitlin Hogue, our Director of Data Analysis and Enrollment. We have met 3 times. Our first meeting, our initial meeting was on February 13th, where at the time we introduced ourselves, talked about what our thoughts were about this working group, what we were looking to accomplish, reviewed some of the concerns, with our calendar. Our students shared some of their concerns. And we, on March 6th, our second meeting, actually started to talk about one of the recommendations was how do we gather information from our community? So we are presently putting together a survey. We had a draft option at our third meeting based on the feedback that we gave to Dr. Hogue in our second meeting. So we actually took the time, I believe it was on April 10th, I think 2 weeks ago this evening, where we again reviewed the draft. We have made some other suggestions. So we're hoping to finalize that as soon as possible so we can get the survey out to our staff, our students at the secondary level, and also our families to be able to, share some of the information that we're looking for to be able to come back and advise the school committee on some of our suggestions moving forward on looking at our calendar. So I'm, again, not sure if the 2 school committee members would like to share a little bit about the committee.
Just very brief.
I appreciate this opportunity to sit on this kind of working group. And as you all know that I'm very interested in this agenda, and I know we have a lot of tasks in front of us, so we cannot move a little bit faster, but at least we are in the process. And I hope that we'll have our product, and mostly I hope the community will be engaged and participate in the survey we are going to release soon. And I hope that folks will have enough attention and motivation to get engaged, because this is important for our community, which is very proud of our diversity, equity, and inclusion. And this is a very important part of our Newton School priorities and our system goals. Thank you.
I think you have both covered it pretty well. I'm not sure there's much I can add. Yeah, I think we all look forward to seeing the survey results.
And I also would be remiss if I didn't mention, we do have a Newton Teachers Association member on there. There are some, again, some contractual items that we need to take into account. So we wanted to make sure that they were also represented. And as I said, we have really been spending time, on questions. And as you mentioned on Ping, we are really hoping through the principals. I know I'm meeting with them tomorrow. I will give them an update because we want as many responses as possible. So we will reach out to our stakeholders, our partners, to hopefully, I think one of the most important things that we talked about was a time limit. I know when I'm filling out a survey, if there's a reasonable time that I have to commit to it, I am more apt to fill it out, to give that information so that we can make these decisions. So hopefully we will have that update in the next couple of weeks as far as the survey being completed and ready to push out to our community.
Thank you, Kathy, on Ping. And Chris, questions from the members? Go ahead, Rajiv.
It's great to see you have an NTA representation. Will they be able to provide feedback to the working group in terms of our staff's desire to celebrate these holidays for their families? And so we're certainly speaking or gathering up information from NPS parents and NPS students. Our staff may have the same desire to celebrate Lunar New Year or Eid or Diwali or other celebrations that are not currently holidays on the calendar. Are we able to assess that, or have we thought about ways to do that?
We are definitely reaching out to our staff. And as we said, the NTA is part of developing these questions just to make sure that the communication is open. They understand once we get this information, there may be a possibility if we decide to make changes, that possibly could be impact bargaining, where we discuss some of the changes to our contract that may have implications if we make decisions, about the calendar as far as when we start school, when we would finish school.
There is 3 separate surveys that are going out, one for students, one for staff, and one for families, that are substantially similar, but slightly tailored towards each population. So they are going to have every opportunity to participate in the survey that any family would.
Thanks, Rajiv. Any other questions? Haruka, any questions? Okay, thank you very much, everyone. The next item on our schedule is a presentation by Katie Hogue, our Director of Data Analysis and Enrollment Planning, with a private school enrollment update. Is Katie? Then we won't do that item just yet. Is Jill on? Okay, well, in that case, is Maureen Lemieux on?
In the building,
Okay.
But Bill Ferguson, I told him 8 o'clock.
Okay.
I can try and get both of them.
why don't you do that? And okay, fabulous. That'll buy some more time, but we're moving along quickly, so like probably 7:30-ish.
Always covering finance and this, so it's a little tricky. Let me know.
I will. Sure thing.
How about them Celtics? How about them Bruins?
Of course. Well,
Uh,
is it
It's
can
just,
it
it's a,
a happy news something?
no, it's an event that's happening this weekend.
Perfectly fine. It's not in our purview.
Guelph dinner
Oh,
is
okay.
happening this Saturday night.
I'll be there.
I will be there also. I hope that more of my colleagues will be able to come. And it's the Global Education Leadership Fund, which helps to fund and provide scholarships for students to take international travel trips who might not otherwise be able to afford them. It's a really, really, really great cause, and it allows students to be able to have incredible experiences in countries that they might otherwise not have been able to have. So
And you said it wasn't a happy event. That's
it is a very happy event. I thought you meant like, I don't know, like something happened in a school, right? I was thinking differently. So, and by the way, for the community who may be watching, is welcome to come. And you can actually, if you search for Guelph, GELF on the Newton Public Schools website, it will come up. There's information. You can still buy tickets.
It's a fun night.
It's a lot of fun.
I happened to be sitting next to a student the Friday before vacation, and we got into a conversation. And it was interesting. I don't know about all of you, but when I get to take a trip, it usually is planned, and I'm packing for probably months to make sure, goodness knows, you forget something. And the young lady was sitting there and was leaving for Rome, I think the next day, didn't have a care in the world, asked if she was completely packed. And it was just, it was great to see a young person really excited about the trip, but not worried about a thing. So we're doing something right.
Our kids are very fortunate indeed. More filibustering? Any more happy news to share or events coming up this weekend? Or in the near future?
Newton Family Singers is a concert for Bruce Springsteen happening in a week and a half. Anybody would like to go see that?
Happy news.
I know you were there. You're a fan.
Rajiv is a fanboy.
It's on May 7th at Temple Beth Avodah.
Library Gala is
Yes.
also
Oh, yes.
unfortunately,
I know, same thing.
on the same night as Guelph, but
Mm.
I'm splitting time between the both.
We're doing events. There's Newton Serves.
Oh, yes, that, oh.
And
I love that
many,
one.
many of our schools are hosting Newton Serves events. So everybody sign up and go clean something or paint something. or
Beautify,
build
pull
something or
weeds. Yeah,
Weed a garden.
I love it.
I believe this Newton Serve will clean some paths, will create a poetry path.
Oh,
Yes, that's I learned from Figure News, and that will be very interesting.
It's already been created, but it will spruce it up.
Oh, interesting. Because once my wife and I, we traveled someplace where there's poetry along the path. Very nice. So I'm happy Newton will have its own poetry path.
So I think we'll still wait a couple of minutes just because this is the bulk of the conversation, and I would loathe for us to interrupt this lengthy conversation with Katie and delay her when she's available to join. We could just take a 5-minute break. How about we do that? All right, we'll be back.
Great. So I'm here tonight to talk about our non-public and private school enrollment for the current school year. As many of you know, we typically do this presentation as part of the enrollment analysis in the late fall and winter, but it's always a year late because we do this census, which I'll talk about in a little more detail, in January of every school year. So we wanted to come back during the current school year to share this information in a more timely way this year. So, oops. Sorry. Put this into slideshow mode. So tonight I have a short presentation that covers the information that was in the memo. I'll talk about a few key points about this census that we do. I'll talk about some information around our total school age population trends, and then provide a little more detail on our non-public school enrollment trends for the current school year. So some key points about this data: we conduct a census of the school age population of students who live in the city of Newton every January as required per Massachusetts state law. This census provides us with data on where Newton resident students are attending school outside of the Newton Public Schools. And this includes private independent schools, private special education schools, other public schools that students might be attending, charter schools, and students who are being homeschooled. The chart on this, or the graph on this slide, is looking at the total school age population in the city of Newton from the 2014 to 15 school year through the current school year. You can see that we've started to see a declining trend in the total school age population that began in the 2020 to 2021 school year. Just to be clear, the total school age population includes students who attend the Newton Public Schools and Newton resident students who attend schools outside of the Newton Public Schools. Compared to last year's total school age population, this year the total school age population declined by 220 students, which is a decline of -1.4%. And decreasing kindergarten classes in the city of Newton as a whole are a main factor in this declining trend that we are seeing. When we look at non-public school enrollment trends overall, the graph on this page is looking at the percentage of the school age population in the city of Newton who are enrolled in non-public schools, so outside of the Newton Public Schools. As of this year, in January 2023, 22.3% of the school age population are enrolled in non-NPS schools. This is a decline from last year, where we had 23.1% of the school age population in non-NPS schools, but it is still higher than pre-pandemic, as you can see in the graph. Prior to the pandemic, we had about 18 to 19% of the school age population in non-NPS schools. The graph on this slide is showing the percentage of the school age population in non-NPS schools by grade level. So the line at the bottom the lowest line in this graph with the triangles is the elementary school population in non-NPS schools. The line with the squares is the middle school population, and the line with the diamonds is the high school population. So in the current school year, the decline in the percentage of students in non-NPS schools is mainly due to a decrease at the elementary level. You can see the enrollment in non-NPS schools at the elementary level this year has declined from last year by 116 students, which is a 9% decline from last year, but it still remains above the level or the percentages that we saw prior to the pandemic. At the middle and high school level, there's been a slight decline in the percentage of students in non-NPS schools, but it's pretty similar to the prior 2 years. When we look at non-public school enrollment in the transition years, which are grades 6 and grade 9, when students are transitioning from elementary to middle and middle to high school, the graph on this chart on this slide is showing that the percentage of the school age population in non-NPS schools in these transition years increased during the pandemic. So the blue line is the percentage of the school age population in grade 6 who are in non-NPS schools, and the red line is the percentage in grade 9 who are in non-NPS schools. So you can see both of the percent of the populations in these two grade levels increased during the pandemic. Grade 6 has returned to pre-pandemic levels, right around 20% of the school age population in grade 6 is in non-NPS schools. However, in grade 9, the percentage of students in non-NPS schools is still higher than pre-pandemic, although it's decreased from last year. This census also gives us information on the types of non-public schools that students are enrolled in. The majority of the students who are enrolled in non-NPS schools this year are in Massachusetts private schools. So 95% of the students in non-NPS schools are in private schools located in Massachusetts. Of that 95% of students, 24% of those students are in private schools that are physically located in Newton, while the other 76% are in other Massachusetts towns, in schools in other Mass towns. And then when we look at all of the students who are enrolled in non-NPS schools, over a quarter of students, 27% or 918 students, are enrolled in schools that have a religious affiliation. So that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to take questions on the presentation or the memo. I will stop sharing.
Thank you, Katie. Any questions for Katie from the members? Go ahead, Rajiv.
Katie, you mentioned that the decline to a great extent is a result of decreasing kindergarten classes. Do we know if this is related to a decrease in the number of young families in Newton or driven by something else, or is that stretching the analysis too far?
So we talked about this a little bit when we talked about the enrollment analysis report, looking at birth rates, both in Newton and then the nation as a whole. So I think that it's a large portion of it is due to decreasing birth rates. So people are having fewer children, and that is contributing to a smaller number of kindergarten students. Home sales in Newton have been relatively steady. We did see some increases last year. So I don't think it's that people are not, like, home sales are decreasing. So it seemed like the largest piece of that is decreasing birth rates. And that's not, as I said, it's not specific just to Newton. It's across the country.
Thanks, Rajiv. Go ahead, Kathy, and then Paul.
Katie, in your memo in table 2, you have the non-public school students broken down by both elementary, middle, and high schools that they would have been districted to. And I am struck by the variation among the different school populations. And what I'm wondering, I didn't have a chance to go back to our enrollment analysis book, but do we have in the larger book historical trend data to compare these school by school percentages to those schools over time? I guess what I'm wondering is, like, when you look at Ward, which strikes me particularly at 45%, I know that Ward has always had a large non-NPS population, but I'm wondering, like, how that 45% looks when you look at it in context over time. Is that in the enrollment analysis book?
So in the enrollment analysis book, we show the same 3 tables that are at the end of this memo. So that information is in there, but it's only shown for the current year and the prior year. However, we have this information going back many years. And so I can tell you that for Ward, Ward has always had the highest percentage of students who attend private schools. The typical percentage is around 35%, in that range, 30 to 35%. So 45% is a little bit higher than what that district typically sees, but they are always the highest of the elementary schools.
Thanks. I recalled it being high. I was just trying to.
Yeah. How much higher? Yeah.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Kathy. Go ahead, Paul.
Thank you, Tamika. I want to say respectfully, and Katie, thank you for the excellent report. I want to say respectfully that I think our senior administrators, and I think this school committee have taken a somewhat ostrich-like approach to this issue of private school enrollment and what it means with regard to the public's confidence in our school system. I've heard members of this committee discount or dismiss outright the information we received from one of the most extensive surveys we've done of the public when the superintendent search was going on. I've heard members of this committee implicitly disparaging petitioners to our body who asked us to pay more attention to academic excellence by suggesting that those petitions were at variance with the values of the Newton Public Schools. And I don't see us taking any additional actions in response to the numbers that Katie has so professionally reported. Looking at her numbers, looking at the charts roughly, because the background data isn't always there, it appears that there are 360, 380 additional children who are going to private schools now compared to the pre-pandemic period. That's 360 or 370 families who have voted with their feet, who are paying what would amount to $14 or $15 million in private school tuition because they're not getting what they need to from us. I think this will be a particularly important concern when we get to the budget discussion in a few minutes. But even beyond the budget discussion, I just don't see that we collectively have expressed concern about these trends. For 2 years, we blamed it on COVID. Certainly some of it was due to COVID, but there's a persistent factor going on here that represents a quantum change from the pre-COVID situation. And I would just urge this committee over the coming months and years to think about that and to think about what any other institution that had lost that kind of market share would think about in terms of the service offerings we provide. Thank you, Tamika.
Thank you, Paul. Emily, go ahead. Anping, I think Emily might, did you want to? Okay.
No, I want to say something, but I didn't know there was somebody ahead of me.
Anping is ahead of you.
Yes, I'm happy
All
to go
right.
after Anping.
Go ahead, Anping.
Okay. Thanks. I share the same concern Paul just expressed. Looking the past 10 years, we can see the non-public school students enrollment percentage increased from 16% to 22%, so 6%. If this trend keeps, that's really concerning. Next 10 years, just say still 6%. Now that will be detrimental to our public school student population because our population is going down now with this increasing. But of course, we cannot say all those students go to the out of district, schools, non-public schools for any single reasons. We don't know. Here we say 27%, Katie, you mentioned that with a religious affiliation. Okay, that number probably increasing, we don't know. Katie, do we have any sense, beside this 27% of students going to the religious affiliated schools, what about the other 73%? Could it be special education, for example, or for academic purposes?
Can I just ask a clarifying question? Are you asking why they're going or where they're going?
Yeah, that's. I think we asked that question before, whether we have any data, collect any data, so-called exit data to see why they chose the non-public schools. Do you have any sense at all?
So we have not collected information on the reasons why families choose to leave NPS in the past. However, we have developed a district-wide withdrawal workflow that we will be rolling out in Aspen, so that when a parent or caregiver wants to withdraw their child from NPS, they go through Aspen, and one of the required questions is why they are leaving NPS. So we will be collecting that information going forward. We don't have it previously because we did not collect that in our previous system for withdrawals, but we will be collecting it going forward. And I will be able to share that information once we get that rolled out.
Okay. And also probably, you don't know, but let me ask, any sense, what about our neighboring peer districts? What could it be their percentage wise in this student population going non-public schools? Any sense?
I don't have that information offhand. There is some information that's reported publicly on the DESE website. I will say my sense is that is not necessarily accurate for every district because it is self-reported by the districts who conduct this census, and I think there's variation in how it's done. So I don't have numbers off the top of my head, and I haven't seen other districts provide this sort of detailed memo on private school enrollment but that doesn't mean they haven't. I just haven't seen it from anyone.
So you said could it be not very accurate? Does that mean our Newton's data could be also interpreted that way, or just some other district not doing their diligent job?
I will say that we take this census very seriously. And we spend quite a bit of time collecting this data, reaching out to schools, and then following up with families of students who went to private school who don't show up on a particular private school census. So I would say that our data is very accurate given the amount of time we invest in this census. And the reason I say that I'm not sure what other districts do is there are some years where I can see for other districts, the information is exactly the same as the prior year. So I don't want to speak for how other districts do this census, but I just don't have a sense of how accurate it is in other districts.
Well, thank you. And I really appreciate your tremendous work among all other tasks. Thanks.
Thank you, An-Ping. Now, Emily.
Thank you. An-Ping actually hit both the points that I wanted to make. So I'm glad you were able to go first. I appreciate the answer, Katie, about what other districts are doing. It would be interesting if we could ever find out if we're apples to apples, what our numbers look like compared to our neighboring districts. I just want to reiterate something that An-Ping said, and I think it's important to say. And I just want to preface this by saying that this does not mean that I personally am discounting people's opinions and feelings about their own child's experience with Newton Public Schools. But I would like to caution us until we start getting this data that Katie is putting in place to ascribing to many, many, many different reasons why parents decide to send their children to private school. And I think until we get that information and that data, I think it would be remiss of us to make assumptions as to what percentage, how many, why, where, until we get that data back from Katie. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. So Emily, I think you made a point. Oh, well, all right. I think, Emily, you made a point that I think is true of every single member of this school committee. I don't know which of us would raise their hand and say, I discount the folks who had concerns about academics. I think we all reiterated strong and affirmative stance on making sure that we are academically excellent. But Emily, you made that point beautifully, so I don't need to touch it any further. But I did want to share a different perspective that I hold, which is to say that I think this committee hasn't been so silent on kind of talking about showcasing why people stay and why they should. It's the subject of the profile of a graduate. It's the reason why Anna Nolan was such an attractive, one of the reasons, one of many, that Anna Nolan was such an attractive candidate to come here and really help us brag a little bit, brag a lot, because we're due. I think You know, I've heard member Chris Bresky talk about that NPS does need to showcase what it does well. And I've joined him and we've had conversations about making sure that at those transition years that we're really giving parents their options, letting them have a view into what comes next, because so many of our elementary parents just don't know what's ahead of their kids in the high schools. They don't know all the amazing, wonderful opportunities there are, but you know, we have to do a better job of showcasing that and selling ourselves. I don't think I would describe it as being ambivalent or anything like that. I think we fully are aware that that's something we need to do better, and we're committing to do that over the next couple of years. Go ahead, Chris.
Thank you. Thanks for the analysis, Katie. So I had a couple questions. You talked about kindergarten enrollment being the main factor, the declining trend overall of student age kids, and that's, you know, the long running demographic trend that we've been seeing. But in terms of the decline we've seen from the peak of kids attending somewhere other than NPS, what's the I guess is there something to learn from, you know, the grade levels that's happening at? Is there an indication of it's students who left during the pandemic, during remote learning, who are coming back? Or is it, you know, kids graduating out and higher percentages of those kindergarten classes coming in are looking more like what they used to pre-pandemic, or none of those?
Well, I did some analysis in the fall looking at kids who left NPS for private school during the pandemic and who had returned. So I think, you know, like not everybody returned. And my sense is that people who left for private school have remained in private school. Not everybody, certainly. We've had people who've come back, but I think that large percentages decided to stay where they were. And like I said, this year we saw that the elementary school percentage has come down the most for enrollment in non-public schools. So I think that provides some more information that perhaps the people who left, again, not everyone, but a large portion, stayed in private school. And then the people who are now coming in the younger grades are sort of shifting back to the patterns that we saw pre-pandemic. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. I mean, I think really what I'm trying to get at is, you know, how should we be thinking about the next 5 years and how that percentage might look? You know, is there a trend we're seeing of incoming classes looking more like pre-pandemic or post-pandemic?
Sure. And I think the information we have at the elementary school level, again, as Kathy mentioned, there's variation across individual elementary school districts. But when we look at elementary as a whole, the fact that that is coming down, like to return to pre-pandemic levels the most quickly, I think is helpful information when we're thinking about who's coming in. I think it looks like it's trending towards returning to the patterns that we saw prior to COVID.
Okay. That's helpful. And then just one other question. I had shared with you analysis I did of the 15 elementary districts, looking at the mean home price in each elementary district per the Newton Assessors database and the decline in enrollment we saw during the lockdown year. Our elementary district with the lowest mean home price around $750,000 saw a 2% decline in enrollment. Our district with the highest mean home price of roughly $1.8 million saw a 16% decline in enrollment. And it was a basically straight line linear regression between those two points. So I've always, you know, had the thesis that this kind of told me two things, you know, kind of along the lines of what Paul was saying. You know, if we're not providing what people want, they're gonna vote with their feet to the extent they have the ability to do so. And the other thing I thought it told me was, you know, with a capacity of private schools and ability to afford them, our enrollment declines would have been much worse. And I think you know, I've looked at peer districts and kind of the same analysis of the peers I've looked at, you know, Wellesley, Weston, Newton, Brookline, all significantly higher declines in some of our neighboring districts, and there's, you know, sort of an income correlation there. How should we be thinking about that going forward? You know, I've often expressed to folks that my biggest fear through this is, you know, Newton eases its way into becoming one of those towns where, you know, if you can afford private school, you afford private school, and everyone else gets left behind with, you know, a system maybe without as much political support. And, you know, the next time that override vote comes around on schools, you know, maybe it doesn't have a chance. I mean, how do we think about the bigger picture of this correlation of income and private schooling, and it's a gap that's widening? Sorry, that was a really long question.
It's well, Katie.
I'm also not sure it's Katie's question.
Okay, that's fair enough. I guess I'm asking Katie from a data perspective on this. Maybe I can leave it as it's something we need to think about. And just one, I guess, last thing to think about in terms of the ward, because this has always stuck at me from the first time I ever looked at this data. It's no other schools even close. And it's been that way at least for some time now. So I think I hope that is something the Ward Underwood Working Group will qualitatively look at in a lot of detail to think about why that is, and is that something that's going to be likely to persist.
Thank you, Chris. So Katie, my question for you is, just as Emily said, we would be remiss in making assumptions about why students are leaving NPS for private schools and other institutions. I think we would be equally remiss in making assumptions about which students are leaving NPS for private schools and other institutions. And so my question is, in the survey data that you're gathering as students are exiting, are we collecting information like demographic information and I don't know, homeowners that it's tricky, right? I understand that, but this would be really useful information for us to have. So that way we're not left with assumptions. We can actually look at data and understand the picture of who is leaving and why.
Sure. The data is collected by student ID, so it is tied to demographics. So we would be able to look at particular subgroups of students. We do not collect. We actually have added a question around owning versus renting in our registration gateway. So we do have a sense when people are registering, because that helps us determine what documentation we need to collect from them. So we do have information on that for new students who are registering, which again is tied to ID. So we could pull that information in, but we don't have it for everyone because that's a new question we've added to our registration software. So we don't have, I would not say we consistently have information on ownership versus renting for students.
Thank you. Thank you for that response. And just for my colleagues, the reason I surfaced that as something we should be collecting and considering is I'm aware of a number of families who have left NPS because they weren't getting as much DEI or as many social and emotional things here that they would have at a smaller school that might be able to niche curate those types of environments. And so I think it's easy to make assumptions, but data and actual, facts is what we should be reviewing always. So go ahead, Paul.
Exactly on that point. It would also be a mistake to assume that if someone goes to a religiously affiliated school, that they are a member of that religious organization.
Sure. Yep.
Quite a few people go to Catholic schools or Jewish schools who are not either Catholic or Jewish.
Yep. Very true.
Or Quaker schools.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you so much, Katie. We appreciate it. You've given us a lot to consider and mull over as per usual. And thanks once again.
Thank you.
Stephen, is Jill on? Okay, then let's just table that item. I don't think it's crucial for tonight. And she might have an issue that we don't know about right now. And let's move on to the FY24 budget review. This is a continuation of the FY24 budget. Our first order of business under this particular item is to take a close-up look. Bill Ferguson.
I was just to see if Bill Ferguson and Ann Berwick, if Steve can find either of them.
Hi, Haruka. Thank you. Sure. So Stephen, Bill Herwick, or Bill Ferguson and Berwick. Thank you. So first item of business on this one is to take up Chris Bresky's proposal that he submitted during one of our special budget meetings right before break. Due to the intricacies of his proposal, Maureen Lemieux, the Chief Financial Officer of the City of Newton, Bill Ferguson, Newton's Co-Director of Sustainability, and Ann Berwick, whose title is the Co-Director of Sustainability, will join us. Chris, we have received your initial proposal and your supplemental documents. The floor is yours. Please take us through as you see fit, and then we will discuss with our guests. Maureen, if you would like to come up and take a seat at the table, that way you'll be good to go. Go ahead,
Sure.
Take it away, Chris.
So thank you, Tamika, for the opportunity to put this on paper for everyone to digest, and now for the opportunity to discuss it. Everyone has my memo dated April 7th of 2023. Where I laid out the initial proposal, and then the memo dated April 20th, where I kind of answered some of the most frequent questions I've gotten, both within MPS and from the community. And I'm not going to spend a ton of time going through them, as I assume everyone's taken a look. I'll just briefly summarize each, and then I want to be available to answer any questions anyone might have. So, look, this all started with the fact that I think, none of us feel particularly great about the budgetary situation we're in and the impact it's going to have on kids. And so as I looked through the budget, I looked for items that we could reallocate to our priorities. And these are the priorities that we all approved back in December of last year, with a particular focus on programming, on class sizes, on social emotional learning and mental health supports. And I was looking for items that could be reallocated to those priorities that wouldn't negatively impact student learning, that they wouldn't be sort of student level trade-offs, so to speak, and that, respected contractual statutory limitations. So the three items were the 3.75% of salaries and wages that we contribute to the city's OPEB trust, Medicare Part B premiums that MPS reimburses for its retirees, which Mayor Fuller has this past week obviously sent something out on, and renewable energy credits for which NPS pays the city. So just to, I think the focus, given that Mayor Fuller has addressed the Medicare Part B premiums from a citywide perspective, and renewable energy credits are a $60,000 item. I think the focus here probably is most likely on the OPEB, and that's certainly where all the questions I have received are. So I just want to highlight that this is a totally separate and distinct conversation than the conversation that's been going on between Mayor Fuller and the Newton Retirement Board and a group of city councilors with whom I've worked closely, and the Newton Retirement Board, which relates to pension funding. That is not what we're talking about here. It is a increasing line item in the city budget, and I look at those proposals as really staving off future cuts that we would be facing and that the citywide would be facing, as what is now in or this past year was an 8.8% line item in the city budget increases to over 13% over the coming years. What I'm talking about here is our retiree healthcare and the money that the city contributes to a trust to invest and earn a rate of return to meet those liabilities decades into the future. That is not about staving off future cuts. That is an immediate impact. That is money that can be reallocated today to meet the current needs of students who have been severely impacted by the pandemic and prevent them from having to be in classrooms of 27, 28, 29 kids. I made the point when I first discussed this, and I want to reiterate it. I wouldn't think about doing this unless it was a bridge to something. And unless it was getting us through a period to where we could grow sustainably. And I do believe that's the case. And I do believe this is a temporary reduction in these items that could exist for very likely the next 2 years. And the magnitude we're talking about here, given the city's actions with respect to Medicare Part B, Kathy Smith has put out to all of us essentially a $2 million restoration list, which I see as the ask for NPS, and that pretty much covers the restoration of class sizes. It includes the strings program and a couple other miscellaneous items, but that's largely the bulk of what we're talking about here. So with $650,000 of positive impact to our budget from the phasing out of Medicare Part B reimbursements this year and an incremental $650,000 next year, we're really talking about $1.3 million this year and something like $700,000 next year to get us over that hump to the point where we can achieve that sustainability. The impact of that, just so we're all very clear, that is $1.3 million this year that would be invested in a trust and would earn an assumed 6.9% rate of return. I'm using the same that the Newton Retirement Board uses in their actuarial calculations. So that $1.3 million would earn 6.9% a year. The $700,000 next year would earn 6.9% a year, and that would compound to about $5.8 million in the year 2040. The city, prior to the current proposals that are on the table with the Newton Retirement Board, projected that our OPEB trust would be $700 million of assets in the year 2040. That will be less because very likely the pension funding piece, given what's on the table, will be moved out. And I don't have the numbers available to me to calculate how much less it will be, but we're still talking, something on the order of, $600 million of assets, very likely. So we're talking about something on the order of 1% fewer assets in the OPEB trust in the year 2040 to meet those future obligations. That's the price. That's the financial impact of us restoring our budget priorities and seeing that we don't have classrooms of 27, 28, 29 kids. I want to further emphasize, and I know I said this before, but this doesn't impact anyone's benefits. The city is currently pays for those benefits on a pay-as-you-go basis, as most every municipality does in Massachusetts right now. It is seeking to build this trust, and I think that's a prudent thing to do, so that as the benefits of those services are earned, the burden is carried, and it makes sense that we should seek to do that. But I mean, everything has limits and everything has a breaking point, and I believe we might be at that point now. So no one's benefits are going to change because of this. This is not what this is about. This is about, do we want to shift some of the burden to the future taxpayers of Newton, as the current taxpayers of Newton are carrying the burden for the sins of decades past, when many of these liabilities weren't addressed. I think the current taxpayers of Newton have already expressed what their breaking point is in the vote that recently took place. So I just don't know how else we get there. I think about the impact of the pandemic on kids. And as you're all aware, I have an 8-year-old and 11-year-old, and I see it every day. And I know many of you see it every day, and it's real. This is not an abstraction. And I don't know any other means of how we can keep those kids in class sizes that we deem acceptable. That was our first budget priority. So to do anything less than to exhaust all options to see that we follow through on that, I don't know how we can do anything else. It's to not do that means it wasn't our priority. We have chosen a different priority, and we have to accept that now. So look, I am open to any suggestions, to any alternatives that will provide us what we need for these kids. But in the absence of any alternative, this is the only path forward that I see. That I'd be happy to answer any questions anyone has on the numbers, the proposal in general, anything else.
Thank you, Chris. Mayor Fuller. Go
Just
ahead.
one clarifying, we'd love to respond when the chair says so. Are you taking the renewable energy credits off the table? If not, if that's part of your proposal, could you speak to it, unless you've decided that you are not making that proposal?
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to. Thank you. So I would, I would think about this as two separate proposals at this point. I think when I originally brought this to the table, we were at the, my intention was to have this as a reframing of the start of our budget discussion. And, just as I said then, there, none of this was, hey, we're gonna zero out all these things, or, it was providing Kathy the authorization to reallocate. That made sense to do in sort of one broad stroke, I felt up front. But given that the city has acted on the Medicare Part B component of this, and given that, this is really sort of been more narrowed and focused, I would see the renewable energy credit piece as a separate proposal from the OPEB piece. Is that a fair?
Could you speak to it? If it
yeah,
is
sure.
one of your two proposals, it'd just be helpful to
Yes,
have your
yeah.
perspective so that we can.
Sure.
Thank
Sure. So Paul brought some of this up, I guess it was the last meeting, I believe, in terms of how the city purchases its energy. We reimburse the city approximately $60,000 a year for renewable energy credits. This item, as I said then, I kind of think about it in the context of this is not something that has a direct impact on student experience. This is not something that accrues a direct benefit to students. And as a community goal and a city goal, I would much prefer that burden be carried by the community and the city and not be at the expense of teachers in our classrooms. So this is not a needle moving dollar amount, but philosophically, I think it's something that probably doesn't belong in the NPS budget. Not a statement at all on the city's program itself. Totally divorced from that.
All right, so I anticipate that each member might have their own questions and want to ask them. Mayor Fuller, you've got to.
I was wondering if it would make sense for our team to lay out some of the things, because then the school committee members have heard a thoughtful proposal from Chris Presky. Maybe they'd love to hear some input and then be able to ask questions of Chris, of our team. Because I think you've heard one side.
I think
Might
so,
be
yes.
useful to hear all.
I
sides.
agree. However, just to get those initial kind of questions out solely for Chris and and that way you can respond to what you've heard from the members and Chris's proposal at the same time. Go ahead, Rajiv, if you have any questions or comments for Chris.
Sure. I'll start with some comments and then have a question that I think I know the answer to, but would be good to hear from Chris. I think Chris's proposal is about opening up the possibilities. Spoken with him about it a number of times. And I think we are in agreement that this proposal does not have to do with zeroing out anything on the budget, but it has to do with trade-offs. And when we're looking at every single line item, as we're supposed to, since we have, I would say, fiduciary responsibility over the school's budget, that we think creatively. Like Chris, I see personally on a daily basis the impact of the pandemic on my son, and I hear from teachers, therapists, guidance counselors, and others at a school about the incredible challenges they're facing trying to support students. We are back in a budget situation, unfortunately, much like we were in last year. And I think it behooves us as a school committee to look at every possible option for addressing the funding gap and acknowledging that we may not be able to address all of it, but as much as possible to try and mitigate the impact of the cuts that are being considered. So I take that seriously. I don't think we're looking at this as a directive to arbitrarily make any change, but absolutely as a request to look at options that are out there and what can potentially be achieved by reducing some of these top line expenses. So that's my statement.
Apologies, real quick.
Please, go ahead.
In order for this to work, I think the best, we keep our questions very tailored to Chris's questions for Chris on his proposal. That way we can have a response from the mayor and her team as to the impact of the proposal on the city's budget and NPS's budget. And then we can ask questions of the mayor's team as well.
Well, I plan to.
Okay, so
trust me.
short, sweet. Go ahead.
Chris, one thing I think we've talked about, but I wanted to confirm is that we are not talking about any kind of permanent shift in OPEB funding. It's prudent to have OPEB funded. It's prudent to get to the point where actuarially we are in a good place. I want to just confirm that what we're talking about is changing the timing of contributions in order to support our students at this time.
Yeah, so what I've proposed from the start is a temporary reduction in the amount we fund into the city's OPEB trust. I would envision that, as I said, in the current year, not to exceed $1.35 million. So that would remain, that would leave MPS funding $1.8 million into the trust for year 23, or I'm sorry, for year 24. You know, in terms of, again, thinking about this as a bridge to NPS living with a sustainable budget, I think that's a question we have to ask ourselves. Do we believe we can get there? And, you know, that's going to require, you know, some of that comes from you know, some of the financial benefits, so to speak, that's projected in enrollment-based declines over the next couple of years. It will come from things like, you know, bring your own device programs. It will come from things like the Medicare Part B reimbursement being phased out. You know, I'm sure Dr. Nolan will come in and have fresh eyes on an organization that's had the same leadership for 12 years, ex Kathy's wonderful 1 year. You know, that I would expect there's probably new programs and new efficiencies, and you know that remains to be seen. But I think this only works if we as a committee believe we can bring ourselves to have NPS live as a sustainable franchise.
Thanks, Rajiv. Unping, your questions for Chris? Appreciation of short and targeted questions.
Not at this time.
Okay, thank you. Fair enough. Cove, will pop to you. Questions for Chris on his proposal?
No, not at this time. You know, I'd like to hear what the mayor has to say as well.
Okay, and go ahead, Paul, and then
Chris, I just want to clarify the numbers. So what's in the budget for this year, the proposed budget for OPEB is?
This year OPEB is forecast to be $3.187 million.
3.187.
Yes.
And you're proposing to decrease that by 1.35 million?
So after the $650,000 proposal by the city on Medicare Part B, that would and looking at $2 million effectively being what we need to get us to achieve those budget priorities we agreed upon, I would see not more than $1.35 million.
Reduction from the
3.187, leaving approximately 1.8 left to
and
to still fund.
Are you making, assume the answer to this is no, that you're not making a formal proposal today for next year, but you're giving an indication of what it might be for next year.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, I don't think we have any ability to make.
There's nothing before us.
Yeah, there's nothing to propose for next year. That's to say what I think that path looks like and what the impact would be, to then say, what is that long-term impact? It's the $5.8 million in the year 2040 that this all compounds to.
Thank you.
go ahead. Thanks, Paul. Go ahead, Emily.
I don't have any questions for Chris. I'm also waiting for the mayor.
Thank you. Kathy, questions for Chris?
Yeah, Chris, I think what I'm not fully understanding is what, to the extent we are not paying, or your proposal is that we would not pay 1.35 million of the OPEB obligation this year, I would assume we would have to make that up in a future year. So in addition to not contributing the 1.35 million this year, I guess what I'm confused about is how you think that puts us on a path to sustainability. Like, I don't get where you think the money's going to come from to make that up.
Mm-hmm.
Because that sort of suggests that, I mean, the longer you don't pay back that 1.3, you have to add on the at least 6.9% interest. So you need to be able to make up what you're not contributing this year. And I guess I just don't see, given my experience with 5 or so years of these budgets, how you do that.
Sure. So there's several components to where we achieve that run rate sustainability. So if you want to think about it, relative to current budget, Medicare Part B is an actual.
That's already factored in. I mean, you're talking about you've already reduced from 2 down to 1.3.
Yeah, so perhaps maybe
counted that already.
Perhaps I'm misinterpreting your question then. Is your question, how do we get the 1.3 back? The short answer is we don't. Okay. And that's why I'm saying the impact of this
is the 5.9
is $5.8 million in the year 2040. That is accounted for by both the 1.3 and the $700,000 next year.
So your proposal is not, so maybe I did misunderstand then,
Yes.
because perhaps what I was thinking you meant is that it would be temporary because we would be making that up over the next 2 years. I think now I understand your proposal is just take it out entirely, don't pay that, and live with the consequence into the future.
Correct.
All right,
It is a shifting of burden of saying, instead of, effectively the kids feeling the impact of that $2 million, we're going to shift some of that burden to the future taxpayers of Newton, as there will be $5.8 million less in the trust. And, think about how that would flow through year after year after year.
I understand now. I think what I was confused about is I thought you were thinking about that we would be making that up.
Nope.
And that's what I didn't see how we would. Okay,
It's
got it.
temporary reduction, and then, hopefully,
Long-term impact.
hopefully sort of by that, 3 years from now timeframe, we're back to thinking about it as growing at a sustainable rate off of the current base, not the base then.
Got
So
it.
it's a
Thanks.
dip down and then back up. Does that make sense?
Does. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Kathy. So I think my question was somewhat similar to Kathy's, and I appreciate your response to her because it helps me with my question, but I was struggling with how to not view this reduction or the 1.3 for this year as a one-time fund. And I think if I'm reading correctly what you've said to Kathy, they shouldn't be regarded as one-time funds because we don't have to pay them back, or you would propose not paying them back, that they would just kind of go into the pool of funds that someday from now, retirees or our employees will have access to. Is that kind of simplified down to, it's not a one-time fund that we would have to repay?
Yeah, I mean, whether you want to think of it as a one-time fund, I guess is, you could, I guess, a little semantics. It in some sense, it kind of is, to say that, this is a temporary reduction, so a temporary decline that will be, I think we have a handle on what those numbers look like for 2 years. And yes, that will have a financial impact to the city. That financial impact is a estimable thing in the way that we estimate how these assets grow. And, that's pretty well tread water there as far as that goes. So the financial impact is that $5.8 million in the year 2040. So yeah, I guess you could think of it as one-time funds in that respect. And that's why I'm saying I wouldn't think about proposing this if there wasn't some way I felt we couldn't get to that sustainable budget.
I hear you. I guess my reticence just around the one-time, thinking about one-time funding and what happens when those funds stop. I think that's part of the reason why we're facing our budget crunch today. And I'm worried about the impact of what year 2 or year 3 might be. And that's where I was going with this in terms of one-time funding.
I would look at it in reverse. I wouldn't say one-time funds are why we have our budget crush. One-time funds is what allowed us to survive, to get through. What's caused our budget crush is our budget. You can't say your funding is causing your budget crisis from that perspective. Your budget's causing your budget crisis.
Well, I think
and
what we saw last time from the presentation, what our last presentation that Liam had, I think roughly 5 point, I don't know, of our overall budget deficit of 6 million was attributable to higher costs of things like utilities and transportation. And so I think we were limping along, to your point. That's true until today. But how do we not think of these funds here as limping us along for another couple of years, and then we'd be back in a situation in another 2 or year 3 of your proposal where we're very similar to where we are now?
So if we look at the long-term rate of growth of the NPS budget, it has grown at, and I've made this point multiple times, it's grown at faster than the rate of the city's budget. NPS has crowded out other parts of the city's budget, just as pension funding has crowded out other parts of the city budget. You know, in the big pie chart, what's left for everything else is a smaller hunk of the pie. And when you look through the NPS budget, and I've talked about this many times, you know, we've gone from 82% to 89%, or 83% to 89% of our total budget has been now consumed by personnel expenses. And, you know, that has grown at a rate in excess of 4% over the past 5 and 10 years, while the NPS budget as itself, as a whole, has grown more in the sort of 3.7, 3.8%. It's not sustainable. You can't do that. Just in the same way, you know, when I made the argument about looking at the future of our pension funding and saying, wow, that's 8.8% today, that's going to be 13.2% in 6 or 7 years. That's 4.4% of the city budget getting eaten up. That's not a lot available for city services. This is, you know, 6% of the NPS budget that's gotten eaten up, that's not available for operating everything else we need to do. And, you know, that's why we're underfunded on maintenance every year and things like that. So very clearly, I think NPS as an entity has to find a way to live long-term within a 3.5% growth range. We can't continually grow, perpetually grow faster than the city. It's not possible. So that's what we have to get to. There's always going to be, to your point about, you know, utilities or, things that are very much outside of our control that are going to cause, there's going to be good years and there's going to be bad years. And, I'm not saying it's going to be 3.5 lockstep every year. That's not reasonable or possible, but the long-term average has got to be there.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, thank you very much. And thank you, Mayor Fuller and your team, for indulging us This was our first opportunity to have that in-depth conversation with Chris about the proposal that he put forward for us. But I think it's time to hear from you what you would like us to know, and you've heard what the committee is, questions and comments that the committee has made, so you can respond to those as well.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Chris. I started when was a couple weeks ago when you first introduced this. I'll start the same way I did then, which is these are important discussions to have. Everything should be on the table. Happy to have this discussion with all of us. I'm going to say a few comments and then introduce Maureen Lemieux, who is our Chief Financial Officer and served for Mayor Warren before me. She first started in 2010. And then I'd like to introduce our two co-directors of sustainability, Bill Ferguson and Ann Berwick, both who know renewable energy credits really well. With an asterisk around Ann Berwick, she also served on this school committee and as its chair, so she also understands education and believes deeply, not that Bill doesn't, but believes deeply in the mission and value of our public school system. My opening comments, just before I turn it over to them, there is no one, I think, who was more passionate and saw the need for the $4.5 million in the operating budget in the Newton Public Schools. It is exactly why I brought forward the proposal that 8 of the 9 school committee members also supported in the resolution. I also am seeing clearly that, yes, the number of students in the Newton Public Schools are down. The needs are up. There's no other way, whether I'm talking to families and caregivers, to students themselves, or to educators in the Newton Public Schools. The academic needs, the social and emotional needs are real and still persist. I would also lift up the shift of our educators increasingly to personalized teaching and learning is admirable and necessary for a whole host of reasons, both to meet the academic needs of our children and their social and emotional needs. I would also say that during the pre-vote period and certainly afterwards, I have heard the deep concerns of parents and caregivers about the impact of, while our budget is increasing by close to $10 million, the fact that it can't increase to closer to 15 million, and the very real impact on children. I've heard them. I've, like Kathy Smith, I spend a lot of time with emails. I have read every single email and I've gotten a lot. I've spoken to many, many, many parents and caretakers as well. I am in a little bit of a different situation than the other members of the school committee, and I want to acknowledge that. As mayor, I am charged by our voters to do 3 things simultaneously and to be a steward in 3 different senses. First is to provide excellent services. Currently, I've always prioritized education. and will always continue to do so. But it also includes public safety and public works and senior services, health services, human services, and yes, our terrific library and parks and recreation. It involves economic development and transportation, housing, and climate resiliency. We as a community, in addition to thinking about and supporting our children, have additional responsibilities. A second category of stewardship is all of our long-term needs. It's clear that assets, physical assets, are one of them, with the largest portion being our school buildings. The other is the enormous unfunded liability that hangs over all of us because of the decisions of previous school committees, previous city councilors, and previous mayors to prioritize the current needs and not the funding for our employees when they retire. The third is to be stewards, for me to be a steward of our financial strength and budgetary flexibility, so we can handle unpredictable conditions and risks. And boy, we've got them in spades. All of us have just lived through the pandemic. We are living through the question of economic downturns and or recessions. We're certainly seeing in the midst of an inflationary cycle. And thankfully, Maureen always gets nervous when I say this, we have not had too many dramatic weather events to contend with. But tornadoes happen and ice storms happen and multiple blizzards in a row, like in 2015 happened. Searing heat is increasingly in our future. That is also my responsibility. When the voters spoke on March 14th, they did not approve either, I thought, the desperately needed additional operating monies for MPS, nor did they fund the addition renovation at Horace Mann. Since then, I've been trying to do everything I can to be creative, flexible, and responsive, particularly to the needs of our children. I am acutely aware that the NPS budget is not sustainable right now. I also, as I'm making funding decisions and making sure that we are making sustainable decisions, I really want to set Superintendent Nolan up for a sustainable budget going forward as we try to support our students and teachers in every way possible. Since March 14th, I've taken 5 steps to funnel additional monies to NPS. 1, increase the allocation up to 9.77 million, up to 3.73%, distinctly higher than the municipal budgets, but in a very creative way. And I thank Maureen Lemieux for working with me on this. We're taking $10 million of free cash with city, but by the way, it requires city council approval. So everybody, we've got work to do with our city council to decrease the amount that we have to bond for Lincoln Elliott, thereby on a sustainable basis for the next 30 years, providing another $600,000 into the base budget for NPS to the allocation. Second, providing a bridge grant of $1.4 million. Newton Public Schools otherwise would be facing another $1.4 million of need in fiscal year 24 because the state, as they should have, by the way, increased the tuition for out-of-district placements by 14%. Third, worked collaboratively with the retirement board to extend the funding schedule to August 2031, therefore by allowing us to free up funding to provide the debt service for the Horace Mann addition and renovation. It's about $1.3 million, 1.1 million in FY24, and then 1.3 million after that. Fourth, we've been working really hard and collaboratively also with our union leadership to change and our health insurance carrier and provide excellent health insurance and provide savings for our retirees, which allows us in a humane way to phase out our Medicare Part B reimbursement program. That will save on an ongoing basis. First this year, NPS, depends on whether you call it 650,000 or 680,000, but Liam can decide where he wants to land on that after he looks exactly at how many people need the Medicare Part B reimbursement. I'll leave that to his calculations. But that amount this year and then that same amount in FY25. And then fifth, just today, I docketed using city funding, which normally would come out of the NPS operating budget, two legal settlements for NPS that we will pay for over on the city side that total $580,000 between the two. All of this is to say, I'm doing my very level best. I'm doing anything and everything I can do to support our children. I believe in our mission. I believe it's important, and I do share the deep concerns about the impact of the need for the savings that Superintendent Smith and her team have laid out for us. Let me end by talking more directly about some of the things that Chris Bresky has suggested. Dialing back on the OPEB payments, and by the way, these are OPEB, instead of using OPEB, I'm going to use retiree health insurance instead of OPEB, if that's okay. It's a little bit clearer for most people. These are payments to Newton Public School retirees. Just want to be really clear about that. And to end the renewable energy credits. Chris suggested that they're reimbursing the city. This is a contract, and that the portion that's related to the schools, so it's paying for a contract, but I'll let Bill and Ann speak to that in a moment. But a few points about Chris's, particularly on the OPEB, retiree health insurance side. He suggested that this discussion is unrelated to the discussions with the retirement board. Narrowly, Chris is correct. The pension board focuses on pension. This is retiree health insurance. But in fact, the retirement board is deeply committed to paying down our unfunded liability on pensions so that we can get to the larger unfunded liability. And so their decision on whether to extend the schedule of payments is very much related to what this school committee decides about retiree health care. Second, Chris suggests that we'll just shift the impact to future taxpayers. I just want to make clear, Newton Public Schools in the city already are the $3 million plus that is in the Newton Public Schools budget for retiree healthcare insurance is half the amount it should be. It's actually more than half the amount. We're already shifting it. It just compounds the problem. Third, suggests that we should prioritize meeting current needs, which are so real, and put off these other longer term needs. That's exactly what got us into this problem in the first place. Other elected bodies or people who did just that. Chris suggests this is just a bridge. It's just temporary. School committee a couple of years ago from now, they'll start funding it. I'm a little dubious about that. Once it's out, what school committee is going to bring it back in, because funding the needs of teachers and students are always understandably the sole priority for school committees. That I get it. And suggested that perhaps this is a bridge and temporary, and that we'll be able to afford it in future years by the bring your own device or the Medicare Part B. Those are already spent. Liam and Kathy Smith are already using those dollars in their proposals. Chris suggests that probably very little harm and great benefits of doing this. CFO Lemieux will talk about the great harm that this is likely to cause on our credit rating and how impactful that is. Chris suggests that the way we've been operating the Newton Public Schools is we've been crowding out so many things out of the Newton Public School budget. We shouldn't be doing that. I would suggest that by dialing back what NPS is doing on retiree healthcare is exactly doing that for us as a city and a community as a whole. It's crowding out all the other things, including my ability to have the allocation that I've been prioritizing for the Newton Public Schools. Finally, Chris suggests there's no real impact on retirees or employees by doing this. We are way behind other AAA communities in funding our pensions and our retiree health care. It does have an impact. And as this group bargains with the Newton Teachers Association and the other 3 unions that are part of the NPS world, the whole ability to offer fair wages, fair benefits that they can know are there for them matters as we hire people and retain people. So I would suggest it does have an impact. I'll stop there. Let me bring in the voices of Maureen and then Bill, Bill's cat, and Ann Berwick.
I love those cats.
If I may, Madam Chair.
Of course.
I think the comments that I will make are a little bit more on the mechanics of what it is that is in the proposal that either is before you or will be before you, ultimately as what is possibly going to be a motion. The first one, I know the $60,000 almost seems de minimis when talking about your budget. And this is not a reimbursement to the city. This is the school portion of the Rex. We have, you see the two people on the screen, we have two incredibly talented, forward-thinking sustainability professionals that the city funds their salaries, as we do so many other pieces of work that is done really with the Newton Public Schools in mind. These two individuals, particularly Bill Ferguson, spends his time working for us, writing grants, ultimately spending city money also, so that we can institute sustainable measures to lower the Newton Public Schools utility bills. Bill can certainly talk to you about the hundreds of thousands of dollars less that you will be spending next year on your utilities than you would otherwise have been. The $60,000 is the Newton Public Schools contribution to green energy. And so I just want to make sure everybody understands your utility bills on the school side, because obviously your bills are even that much higher. You have so much space that you need to electrify, would be hundreds and probably well over $1 million more next year had we not done all of those projects. That's all I'm going to say about the Rex. As far as the OPEB, the retiree health insurance, back, just so that people understand the history of it, back in the early 2000s, the government standards, accounting standards changed. And so now municipalities and state governments, but government entities now must recognize their long-term liability for retiree health insurance on their balance sheet. We went from perhaps having a balanced balance sheet several years ago to when we started having to recognize OPEB on our balance sheet, we are now in a negative position. So too are most municipalities across the country. That is not unique to us. But the rating agencies are really taking a harder and harder stand on that. Moody's this past fall, for anyone who may track any of this, updated their ratings methodology. They added a 10% more weight to our position with our long-term liabilities than it had before, and decreased our financial management of the city by 10%. They did this for everybody, not just Newton, but Newton, where we scored well on our financial management, we clearly do not score as well when it comes to our long-term liabilities as opposed to our peers. This all matters. We are going to be bonding $175 million for school projects over the next few years. 40 million for Countryside, 60 million for Franklin, 50 million for 150 Jackson or Lincoln Elliott, and 23 million for Horace Mann. $175 million. If anyone tells you that a AAA rating does not garner us better interest rates, they are not telling you the truth. We consulted our financial advisor, who advises us on all of our bond sales. I asked her if there was really any truth to the fact that it would only be about 15 basis points of a difference in the interest we would spend versus as a AAA versus a AA. She said, absolutely not. That is not true. She spends her life selling municipal bonds. That is not, just simply not factual. The other thing that we did was we contacted Moody's to make sure that we would understand what happens to our rating as a city if we not only move our pension funding date to August of 2031? What would happen? What they told us is Newton is very, very light on reserves. We've always known that. They have allowed us to have lower reserves as a percentage than most AAA communities because we have convinced them and done very well in ensuring that we have such strength in our financial management of this city that it is okay for Newton to have a lower ratio of reserves. That's not going to be true. I don't even have to think about whether or not Moody's will change our bond rating if we were to all of a sudden pull back on what we are setting aside for OPEB. I can sit here and categorically tell you we will lose our AAA rating. So we're bonding $175 million worth for schools. It may sound like a decent trade-off, but we will end up spending much, much more money on interest payments over the next 30 years. So just to add my own perspective, obviously my job is as the financial stewardship, as the mayor said, of the city. We all have so many things that we need to balance. We need to provide good services for everybody, but we also need to make sure that the city is financially sustainable. And so I would say to you, making a decreasing the amount of OPEB that we are setting aside in the city and the school department combined will absolutely impact our bond rating, and then the cost of our debt service for the next 30 years. So with that, thank you for indulging me.
Perhaps we could bring in the voices of Bill and Ann to talk about Rex.
Sure, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Okay, thank you. Just to follow up on what Maureen said, as far as the mechanics of the rec purchase, we entered into a 4-year contract that runs concurrent with the electricity contract for our recs. And we buy the equivalent of 10% of our total energy use each year in recs, renewable energy certificates. The total annual contract for those recs is $80,850. We allocate that cost to departments based on their electricity use. So every department pays their share, but the school department, of course, is by far the biggest electricity user of all the departments. So the share for the school department, I believe, was $63,000 this past year. So that's how that's determined. But let me put it in context, at least the context I look at it with. And that is, we have built solar projects on several schools, on school properties. The school department gets the savings from those solar projects. That includes 4 projects where you get net metering credits on your electricity bills every month. And the 3 latest projects, which are at Zervis and the Ed Center and North High School, what we call behind the meter projects, where you pay 8 cents a kilowatt hour for that electricity. So you get a discounted electricity for the output of those solar systems. So the value of that, I just did a back of the envelope. I think the value of that is about $120,000 a year. So it offsets those increased costs for the recs, or your share of costs for the recs. And as Maureen also mentioned, I want to put this in the context of other energy things we do at the schools. We've obtained about $2.5 million in grants and rebates that we've spent on energy efficiency projects in city buildings. And probably 80% of that money was spent on schools. And that money in turn saved more money on your electricity bills, primarily by putting in LED lighting in most of your schools. So I did a calculation a few years ago. It's hard to calculate these savings, but I calculated that we were saving about $350,000 a year in electricity on the cities, all the city's electricity accounts, and most of that is in the school department. And those savings have been going on for years, because these are projects that have a life of at least 10 years, these LED projects. So, so I like to save energy, and I like to save money, and I like to find free money. And a lot of that goes to the school department. And actually, I spend probably the majority of my time on school department projects over my career with the city. And I work with my good friend Dave Stickney on most of them. So that's some context I wanted to offer to you, and hopefully that helps you understand how we've been operating relative to the schools and what kind of positive ramifications we think we're having on the school department's programs.
Anne, would you like to add anything?
You're on mute, and you're muted.
Sorry. Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I would. I'm an energy nerd, and I could talk to you about all of the technical, probably quite boring aspects of renewable energy credits and renewable portfolio standards, but don't worry, I'm not going to do that. Also, I want to say that my heart is with you. As the mayor mentioned, I was chair of the Newton School Committee in ancient times, and additionally have 4 grown children who went through the Newton Public Schools. 6 of my 8 grandchildren are in public schools. 2 more will be, but they're too little at the moment. But I want to talk about this just for a moment from a sort of more philosophical perspective. Sustainability spending today rarely has immediate, tangible, positive impacts on the mission of a company, a nonprofit, whatever. And that makes it really painful and difficult to address climate change. So if it's in nobody's or in very few people's immediate interest to address climate change, whose job is it? And I'm sure you know what I think the answer to that is. And just to be absolutely clear, I think it's the job of all of us. And I think it would be unfortunate to send a different message to our kids. So I'll stop there.
I'll just close by saying the interrelationship between, I'll call the city the mothership, and our largest department, Newton Public Schools, is a fabulous, intricate web of relationships and support. I understand why Chris and others are looking at pulling one thread, pulling another, perhaps pulling a third, and saying, well, that doesn't have a direct impact on our students right now. And we know how real the impacts of the cuts will be. So let's not do it. I come at this with great belief and love for our public schools, but knowing that all these other fabulous people who support the Newton Public Schools, if we're going to start pulling out things, they're real, they're important, they are critical. I can shift them back over to the city side and fool around with allocations. I'd prefer not to. But we have gone through every line item on the city side. I promise you, we are not spending any dollar without considerable thought, including our renewable energy credits and our current payments towards our future retiree health care. And we have looked hard. We believe in it. I'm trying to do really good things within my ability and within the financial constraints that our voters have set for us.
Thank you, Mayor Fuller. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Anne, and thank you, Maureen. I think we will equally do the same scenario before, where we went around each school committee member having an opportunity to ask this team their questions in direct response to what you've shared, what you've articulated, as well as what Chris has put forward. So Cove, we'll start with you, and then we'll work our way around.
Thank you, and thank you for everyone who has presented. I understand the tension between the city side and the school side. I understand that that's always going to be a tension, that we are responsible for the schools largely and or solely, and that the mayor and her team are responsible for the city side as well. I think that my concern is about the sustainability and how, I've heard a number of times that we're trying to set up Anna Nolan for success, and I don't really understand how we do that with class sizes that we're talking about. Class sizes in the, when I was first in the district at Memorial Spalding and we had a class that went over 25, people were very upset. Students were crowded into classrooms. We ended up remedying that. And now to talk about classes that are, higher than that, and that's a starting point then for the next year, when we will likely have more classes that are higher than that, because that becomes the new norm. I think that to me feels very unsustainable as a system, the system that we have right now. And so to me, I feel that we need to look at every option to be able to alleviate that pressure on the system. Long-term, some of those options might be different things. I do see ways out of the lack of sustainability that Chris has talked about, through either, continuing declines in enrollment, through, bigger moves like building consolidation, which I know is not a very popular idea. But, finding other efficiencies. But I can't see, continuing to just gut the classrooms and have such high class sizes. I can't see that as sustainable and a road forward for success for our new superintendent. So I guess I don't really have a question particularly, but that's my position on it at the moment.
Thanks, Cove. I think now we'll pop over to Rajiv. questions for the mayor and her team?
Yes, thank you, Maureen. That was really helpful to hear. And Mayor Fuller, I appreciate everything you've done. I know it's not easy to find additional funding. This is a process we're now going through for the second time. And what you have found so far, I think really does move the needle with helping Newton Public Schools, right? Which is our collective goal. I had a couple of more specific questions. So the first is around the bond rating. I know that we are a well-run city and have held on to a AAA bond rating for some time. And my understanding is the way Moody's or S&P works on bond ratings is essentially by looking across similar municipalities and then figuring out tranches of where each grouping falls in terms of its rating. And the best run cities and the best financial positions are in a group that are looked at collectively and placed into a AAA bond rating, which again, I understand and appreciate that that's where we want to be. But why do we think that a $5 million difference in future OPEB funding, and this is taking it out quite a number of years, is going to have that material and impact immediately on our bond rating?
Thank you for the question. My concern is, first of all, so I didn't get to ask Chris a question. My question would be, if in fiscal 24, the intent would be to lower the OPEB contribution to, was it 1.8?
1.8 would be what
1.8.
would reconcile to what Kathy has indicated is necessary to restore those most critical priorities. Yes.
So my question is, what does the appropriation become in fiscal 25?
So fiscal 25 would be a $700,000 reduction, right? So we would be restoring that piece. So that would go from 1.8 to approximately 2.5. And then, some of these other things we're talking about will have had a chance to have impact at that point. And I would seek to restore that, $3 million plus level as soon as possible after that.
So thank you for that.
Yeah.
And so from my experience with the city, I don't know how we would get there. If we are making the assumption that the school department's budget is going to increase by 3.5% per year, even if you are able to negotiate a contract that does not exceed a 3.5% per year growth, I don't see where you will ever find the money to be able to catch up, unless somehow the up so that we can guarantee the schools that we will be able to allocate 3.5%, maybe more in some years. I mean, maybe it'll be 3.75 in a good year, or even if it were 4%. But even if it were 4%, that's only 0.5% more. With all of the needs that we know will always be the most important things in front of you, not you directly, but all of the members who come and serve after you. I don't believe that any future school committee will be able to look at needs and say they can add that money back in. That's just what I think will happen. It's my opinion. And so I worry that the money will never get back in. And so my fear is that we're not talking, if we were only talking about a change for 1 year, may not be great from a financial, from a CFO's perspective, but it would be different than what I think would happen. If for all of you, not all of you, I don't think you were all on the school committee in March of 2020 when COVID started. And we had to very quickly, when we understood what the financial ramifications were going to be, especially to our revenue stream, separate from our property tax revenue. Our property tax revenue wasn't really going to be impacted, but so many other revenues were. We knew when we put that budget together, we needed to reduce our budget by $9.6 million is what we determined. We came to you as a school committee and asked you to absorb 1.5 million of that, knowing that you are the largest department. Our debt service was cast in stone because we sell our debt in January. So there was no way that we were changing our debt service. Our retirement, we went to the retirement board. We asked them to help us also. But we came to the schools, asked for 1.5 million for that 1 year, fiscal 21. And we said to all of you who were here back then that we would then in fiscal 22, no matter what, we would put your budget back to what it would have been had you not given up that 1.5 million that year. Now, none of us knew at that point in time that we would ever get the kind of federal funding and ESSER funds and everything else that we all received. We had no idea that that was coming. But I will tell you, when we looked at the budget, we absorbed $8.1 million on the city side to make sure that we weren't impacting our students by any more than we had to. And we did follow through the following year. So it's not to say that it can't happen because we made that happen, but that was our commitment to all of you. I don't think a future school committee would ever be in a position to put that money back in. That's why I think it's so detrimental.
Do you see a situation where there is a temporary hold or decrease and that's what's agreed to? I do get your point, right? If it's the funding will reduce by X dollars this year and will stay that way until a future school committee decides to change it.
Mhm.
You absolutely run that risk. If it's a matter of the funding will change for this year and next year, let's say, and then we'll revert back. I'm thinking of it a little bit, and someone had made, this is not my own analogy, but it's the funding of a 401k and in a certain situation, which actually happened to many of us individually.
Mhm.
When the pandemic hit, we need to spend money on other things, and a temporary dip in saving for retirement, with the expectation that you hope to make it up. But even if you don't, current challenges need to be dealt with. That kind of approach is, I hope, certainly possible, right? Not making a change in perpetuity, but thinking about one that is for a very specific time frame.
Can I jump in and just this? I'll give you an example from last year. We had a difficult budget season with the Newton Public Schools last year. We used one-time funding of $400,000 to support the maintenance, charter maintenance line. It ricocheted or boomeranged this year where Liam and his team had to put that $400,000 back in, which is crowding out $400,000 of other important needs for our students. So it's these, what we think of as temporary one-offs, it'll just be this year or just 2 years. It's insidious and really deleterious, even as it's insidious and deleterious what's happening potentially to class sizes. But I will note that last week, we on a sustainable way have supported another 680,000. So if we look at Superintendent Smith's list, we can do a lot of good. We can't do all the good that all of us want. But it makes a dramatic impact. Oh, it depends on what this school committee decides. Is it for elementary class sizes? What is it for strings? What is it for? Is it for UOD? This group will decide. But I'm trying my best. I promise you.
So with regard to that last point, I think how I'm envisioning is while Maureen is here, Bill and Ann appear to not be here at the moment, though they may be in the background, I don't know, but utilize their time most effectively. By asking them all of the questions. And then tomorrow morning, we can really go into the weeds with Liam and with Kathy and really see what items we have that we can bring back and what needs that might still leave unfilled. So let's continue asking our questions of Maureen and Bill and Ann. Kathy?
And I cut off.
Oh,
Maureen.
sure.
I
Go
didn't
ahead.
know
If I may, Madam Chair,
Yes.
I just want to answer Rajiv's question, because whether or not I have faith that the school committee a year from now would be able to get that money back into the budget is not ultimately going to be the point. I believe that Moody's would question it. And by them changing their methodology through which they rate us, they don't look at, there's a scorecard. It's a report card, and they use all of our financials and they measure exactly where we are. And so our scores on the long-term liabilities will go down if we do anything. They will go down, and we are already close enough to being a little too far off to keep a AAA. And it's a score sheet. The mayor knows this. We have discussed it with them, but they will be in a position where they won't be able to maintain it for us. We already, if you look at the score sheet, it's public information. We do not score as a AAA. It's public information. They notch us up because we're the city of Newton. We have strong financial management. If our, especially our long-term liability section, which they are putting more weight on now, if that gets a lower score next time around, they won't be able to notch us by as much as they need to. And as I say, it's public information.
Thanks, Rajiv. Kathy, questions?
So Maureen, I did have a question for you. You talked about the difference in going to the bond markets between selling bonds at a AAA rating and selling bonds at a AA rating. And I think you said it would be more than 15 basis points. Do you have a sense of what it would be? Or I mean, I know it's hard to guess because we're talking about what the bond markets are going to be like come January, but did you get any feedback about what that interest rate difference is likely?
No, to be honest, but it was the way that she reacted to me when she said, let me tell you, it is not 15 basis points. Whether it's 25, I don't know, or 50, I did not ask her what it would be.
For the general public out there who may not be as familiar with basis points as some of us. So let's say we're selling for ease of math, we're selling $10 million in bonds. What is 10 basis points equate to in terms of, I mean,
Goodness, I'm
don't
sorry,
know
I
that
cannot
can
do
off
that
the
in
top
my
of
head at the moment.
Yeah.
It's $10,000.
That's helpful. I also had a question. I don't know whether it's really for Anne or for Bill on the recs. And I think, Bill, you might have said some of this, but I missed it in taking notes. I think you described that the recs.
It's $80,850 per year for the
80,000.
for 2,100 recs. That's right.
And what's the relationship between the contracts for the recs and the contracts and our utility contract for electricity?
There's separate contracts that run concurrently. So our electricity contract is at 9.4 cents a kilowatt hour, which is very low for the current markets, as you all know. So we're doing well on that, and that contract is good through November of 2024. So we have it in place through fiscal 24, but partway through fiscal 25, it's going to be replaced, most likely at a higher cost.
And is the term or the expiration date of the rec contract the same then?
It's I think it's actually December. It's like 1 month off.
And are they essentially tied together in any way, or are they independent contracts?
They're independent contracts.
Okay. Thanks so much.
Was that Kathy?
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Kathy. Chris, any questions for the mayor and her team in this context?
I don't have any direct questions other than, you know, there's probably, I would say, elements of what they discussed that, you know, I would probably disagree with. I don't know, maybe that's better held for let everyone get their sort of factual questions out of the way.
Appreciate that. Yep. Go ahead, Paul.
Thank you. And thank you both, all four of you, for your thoughtful comments. Tell me if I'm understanding correctly, Maureen and Mayor Fuller. It seems to me that you're saying that given your broader view of long-term city finances and the choices that you need to make, that were Chris's motion with regard to the OPEB line item pass, that you would feel it necessary to reduce the allocation from the city to the school department by an equal amount so that you could continue to fund those OPEB payments.
That is accurate.
Okay. So in that case, Madam Chair, if that turns out to be the case, if that sequence of events turns out to be the case, I just want to put this body on notice that I plan to make a number of motions with regard to other cuts in the school department budget to help restore the items that that Kathy and Liam have put forth as their priorities, and to say that those will be equally difficult choices for us to make. But given the priority that we have all put on class size, I will advocate for. And I would further say to Maureen and to Mayor Fuller that based on the many comments we've gotten from members of the public around the class size issue and around those families' determination to live in Newton in the first place and to be part of the Newton Public Schools in the second place, that those could turn out to be of substantial value in your discussions with Moody's as well, that preserving those class sizes in terms of public support for the Newton Public Schools might be just as of interest to the people at Moody's as the items you've mentioned. So I just want to say that as kind of a precursor to where we might go on this. And I'm not saying that in any kind of threatening way, but it just seems to me as someone like Maureen, who's been involved in municipal finance for a long time, that those rating agencies don't just look at reserve margins. They don't just look at allocations for future liabilities. They look at the viability of the housing market and the desirability of the community. And a key element of the desirability of this community is the desirability and confidence people have in the schools. And what we're hearing from families is that a key element of that is class sizes.
Thanks, Paul. Thank you. Go ahead on Ping.
Thanks for all wonderful input. And I did spend some time studying about Chris' memo, and what was a little bit challenging. I asked me quite a few questions, and I will not say I fully comprehended all the concept. I would like to look at the bigger question, by the way. Also, thanks for particularly Mayor's and Maureen's input regarding the Moody rating. That's something new to me. But I appreciate Paul's concept, and I would think too, before even Paul say that, when Moody look at the community, I think quality is not only bonding money. There must be other things. Those people are very smart, and Newton has such quality and reputation. And I don't think, well, that's my layman's view. Because of this, we are doing this for schools. And Newton is well known, most of all, I said many times, I'm willing to say again, because of school system. And this time, I want to add one more factor. And we heard about the private school enrollment, the number from 16% 10 years ago, now 22%. And if we do not do a good job this time, I'm afraid some parents probably will vote by their feet again. And certainly we've seen this in the past few years. It's real, it's very real. And Ward School has over 40% of parents send their kids to private schools or non-public schools. That's very concerning. And I always thought Newton has about 15 to 20% student population in private schools. That's when people ask me. And I think 10 years ago, that was a percentage. So overall, I think this is very critical now. And I appreciate this discussion. I really appreciate it. And to make everybody well-informed, educated about this. And I'm thinking priorities as school committee members. I think our priority is very clear and we have to do something. So let me stop here, and I need to digest all the information we heard tonight. But again, I'm hearing Paul saying that if situation, as Mayor already indicated, that if we ask according to Chris' proposal, then the counter action, then we still have to find some way to cut the money. And I understand, let me say quickly, I came from China. So one of the key values in Chinese culture is, first of all, you don't overspend your money. That's very clear. No matter how poor you are, you have to have some money in bank or your mattress. In Chinese people, poor people did not have the mattress, so put it under the pillar or somewhere. And I did the same thing. But secondly, probably even more important, education is number one. No matter how you're poor, you have to pay your kids education. And that's why many parents here pay their kids college education, even though they're so poor. They're willing to do everything. There's a phrase in China, called you're willing to break your pot and you sell your furniture to support your kids' education. So that's very important. So I have two key values here. And as educator myself, probably I will go with the second one. No matter what, you have to support your kids' education. Let me stop here. Thanks.
Thank you, An-Ping. Emily, go ahead.
An-Ping, that's a hard act to follow. I also just want to start by saying that, this is quite the situation that we're in right now. And, as elected officials in the school committee, our job is to advocate on behalf of the students of the Newton Public Schools to ensure that they get the best education that we can possibly provide them. And so I appreciate the out-of-the-box thinking that has come up from Chris. My main question was Paul's question, which was, if we do pursue this avenue, what does that mean in terms of the allocation? So I appreciate your answer and your direct answer, and I appreciate the question. So I think I don't really have any other questions to ask other than I think it's going to be interesting over the next couple of days.
Now that's a hard act to follow, and a true one. I think where I'm struggling is that I see this as there's a lot of areas where there are shared costs and shared benefits between the Newton Public Schools and the city of Newton. There are so many times in my relatively short time on the school committee where I remember the city coming in and funding something that the schools were struggling to fund. And I don't know if that's an easily quantifiable amount over the years, how much we're talking about, but it creeps up there. That's a significant amount of funds outside of our allocation. So these are just small, large pools. We talked about our recent, your docketing today of the 2 settlements payments for the Newton Public Schools and 2 litigation matters. We've talked about the bridge loan for the out-of-district tuition. I mean, the lighting, Bill Ferguson, I heard you talking about our LED lighting and how we were able to have these efficiencies because of savings that the city has put forward. And we realize the benefits in those ways. So I think it's a little aggressive, and I'm going to use that word, I use it again, that this proposal it's a big kind of step in the direction of saying we're stepping back from the partnership, because that partnership exists. And I think we can't really disassociate from the fact that we do get additional funds when there are times when the Newton Public Schools is struggling. And if we are going to step back or pull away from our obligations, and I think of them not as future obligations, I think of them as payments that we're putting aside today for the employees that we have today, and we're putting aside a couple of bucks so that tomorrow when they retire, they can get these health savings. And if I think about it that way, it does give me some pause to just say, we're going to worry about that tomorrow. I am kind of compelled by the idea that that's why we're here now. And that's why I brought up this concept of this one-time funding. It's an attractive way for us to say, it gets us the things that we want right now, that we feel that there are our priorities, and they're 100%, I agree. I think we all do. Smaller class sizes and some of the reductions that we've had to kind of consider. Those are not things that we want to have our kids experience here in the Newton Public Schools. But the idea that these are the only creative solutions, that's not the case. We've all been kind of thinking about creative ways to tackle this budget. And the mayor has been doing some creative ways to tackle the budget. And indeed, there have been an infusion of $680,000 and a commitment for that same sum next year as a creative way to tackle our current budget issues. So I think we need to keep thinking about it. I think I'm going to thank Anne and Bill and Maureen for giving us information to mull over. And tomorrow, when we reconvene at 10 o'clock, we will have Kathy and Liam and the administrative team. We'll take a look at what we can do with the monies that we have, and really then think about whether we want to pursue the avenue that Chris has put forward on the table. I don't know where. I think that's the only way to take it from here. And you know, barring any other questions for Maureen, Anne, and Bill, I think we should say goodnight to those folks, and we'll reconvene tomorrow. Well,
Procedural question?
Sure.
Chris never made a motion.
No, he didn't.
I assume you're planning to tomorrow morning?
I would say absent some other alternative source of funding, to use the chair's words, then yes.
Just want to be prepared for what we're likely to see
Sure.
first thing in the morning.
Sure, but tomorrow morning, I think we'll start with restorations that we can do with the funds that we already have. And then we'll take up motions that you might want to make to do those additional items. Does that make sense?
Sure. I
All
don't
right.
know if you wanted to allow me the opportunity to just respond to a couple of things.
If
I
you would
heard,
like to, go ahead.
as I had said.
Yep, absolutely.
So I guess, I mean, I'll start just because you just said it. And again, I can't emphasize enough. These dollars go into a trust that's invested into securities with an assumed rate of return. And that's what ultimately, you know, will fund retiree healthcare many years out in the future. Absent that money being in the trust, that would have to be funded on a current basis, just as it is now by us and by every other municipality in Massachusetts. If you look, as I said in my memo, across the state, the average level of funding for pension trust is 73 or something %, and the average level of funding for an OPEB trust is about 5%. And Newton is low on both of those. We are below the averages for both, for sure. But again, the concept of I don't want anyone to think that there's not an obligation here, absent the funding of this trust. So just a couple quick thoughts. You know, I know your financial advisor believes the incremental cost would be in excess of 15 basis points. You know, I've spoken, I work in institutional investment management. I deal in credit ratings and basis points all the time, albeit not I'm not a municipal investor. I have spoken to a couple of folks who are municipal investors, specifically in Massachusetts, at large money management firms in Boston that I'm sure you know the names of. And they believe the difference between a AAA and a AA plus rating for Newton would be substantially less than that. So just a difference of opinion from the expert you talk to and the experts I've spoken with. And that would make sense to me, given the national average of an index of AAA bonds versus AA bonds is kind of been running in the 10 to 15 basis point range. And, you know, I would suspect we would be inside the national average from that perspective. You did mention how these liabilities are now on our balance sheet. And I just want to be clear about that point. They were always there. There's that, whether we put them on paper and say, you know, here's hundreds of millions of dollars of liability that show up on a piece of paper, they were never not there. The economic reality is these liabilities have always existed. The nature of them does not change by virtue of a GASB pronouncement saying they go on a balance sheet. They become much more apparent to the public, for sure. You know, the agencies have placed more emphasis on it, but you know, I don't think the agencies were ever unaware that these liabilities existed. So it's sort of a bit of semantics. The economic reality hasn't changed. And I would, you know, I bring up the AAA AA point. Just you know, that is the impact of that scenario. To Rajiv's point, you know, and again with the folks I've talked to, I don't know that a $5.8 million difference in our 2040 OPEB trust balance is going to change minds on the agency front. And I mean, personally, I guess I would be surprised if it did. But you know, I hear your point as well of, you know, look, it's about is this going to be the trend? Is Newton going to abandon these liabilities? I have tried to make it very clear that I don't see this in that regard. I do see how in 2045 and 2045 in for year 25 and for year 26, adding back that $700,000 one year, $700,000 the next year would equate to 0.23% of our budget for those years. So that's the money we've got to find through all these other means that we've been talking about, these 5 or 6 other avenues of future cost savings. And I do think that is entirely possible if you have a group of people who are committed to doing that. And, you know, I think that's something we can get to. The other thing I would say on that is this is one piece of the OPEB puzzle out there. And, you know, from a pension perspective, that's mostly not NPS in the sense of our teachers, our educators are under the state system and not the Newton system. So, you know, what makes us unique, I guess, is, you know, if you think about us from every other city department, we're the only city department that has an elected body who has statutory authority over its own budget. Public Works, police, fire, they don't have that. So this is a unique unique instance. And I think it's, you know, from that perspective, I'm not suggesting the city does what it wants on its other departments. It has a greater level of control. So it's just worth pointing out there is a difference here. There is a statutory difference here. And that's worth noting. And I believe that would potentially play into the agency's thinking. The fundamental difference we seem to be talking about here is, do we think we can do the responsible thing or not? I think we can. You are much more skeptical that we can. I understand where your skepticism comes from, taking a look at the last, 10 or 15 years of budgets. I get it. But I mean, from my perspective, this is absolutely a commitment that we can't do this forever. And as I've said in my memo, if 2 years go by and we haven't made any progress, I mean, we're going to have to make really tough decisions. But I'd rather make those decisions in 2 years, not just because I'm kicking the can down the road, but I've said this with using ARPA funds last year. I'm hoping our kids are going to be in a better place in 2 years. And those kids, if it comes to pass and we've exhausted all options, that kid is going to be able to better handle that larger classroom and less level of support 2 years from now than they are today. And I think that's an option worth seeing out. And, I've said it a million times, but why do these kids need the supports they need? It's the decisions of this body. It's the decisions of society in general to say kids are going to carry, in my opinion, too much of the burden for the sake of adults. And I truly see it as our moral obligation to repay that debt to them. So none of us can control what the city does. If I would just point out, if the mayor decides to cut the allocation to NPS, we are no worse. I don't think she's going to, come after us and take more. And I do recognize if she doesn't hold all the cards, she holds 51 of them. But, and me and the mayor had a discussion about this. This is, she's only on the other side of this because she happens to be the mayor and she makes the allocation, and that, that is what it is. This is not a, this is just me and hopefully us figuring out how we get this done for kids, nothing more.
Thanks, Chris. So Mayor Fuller and your team, any final thoughts?
I'll defer anybody from the team first and then I'll add on, but Maureen.
I would only make one quick comment, because the reason I say I have fears about replenishing those funds in a year or two. We know that we're giving you the bridge grant this year, is what we're calling it, the 1.4 million. If the state moves forward and keeps that 14% increase, which obviously I know we're, certainly working that angle also. But if they do, if you as a district receive 75% circuit breaker money, you're going to have a $300,000 or $400,000 issue with that you'll have to deal with. You heard Bill say that our electricity contract is expiring a year from November. We have met with our utility consultants already, and we know that right now the futures market, and this isn't a surprise to anybody, for electricity is significantly higher than what we're paying now. I think you spend about $3 million or so dollars, and I don't know if Liam knows the exact number, but I think you spend more than $3 million a year on electricity. If we see a 7, 8, 10% increase on a $3 million line, that's going to crowd out your very good intentions of trying to add back money into OPEB. But that's why I say there are always going to be things like that happen. So I'm not saying it in a negative way at all, just that when we look at 25, I'm already looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars that are going to impact all the other decisions that you're going to make. And we can have the most sustainable budget in the world, but when you have things like that happening, they crowd out other things that you may be so well intended in wanting to do. That's the only comment that it's not that I'm just skeptical because I am, it's because I know of other things that are going to hit your 25 budget.
And I'll just add on, my belief in Newton Public Schools has the portion of the budget going to the Newton Public Schools. It's gone up every single year as a percentage of our total city spending. I believe in the Newton Public Schools. I am crowding out our other spending, and we're way behind on our retiree health care as it is. We're just incrementally trying to make a difference. And it does make a difference. It is the prudent thing to do. It is the necessary thing to do. Any financial planner will tell us we should be actually funding our retiree health care more than we are today. To take steps backwards is not in the financial interest of us as a community. It's not that I'm going to change the allocation. The costs are the costs are the costs. It's just I'll flip it over to the city side and we'll take the statutory authority over the healthcare insurance over onto the city side. We'll put the funding there. In a weird way, we'll just cut NPS out of it. And so I suggest we look at Paul's suggestions and other suggestions, and there are some for us to discuss, as it's kind of an empty gesture, I think, to potentially vote on this. I actually agree with you, Chris, that we adults are supposed to be here to support our youngest in our society. We also have lots of obligations to, I would say, our older residents. We have obligations to keep the city safe. We have the obligations to pave our roads better than we do. We've got lots of obligations, and I will keep prioritizing it. The Newton Public Schools, it should be, that's okay with me. I just, some things we're so far behind on, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars behind. We can't keep passing the buck.
So I thank you, Maureen. Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Bill. And thank you, Mayor Fuller, for your remarks. Chris, thank you for running through the entirety of your proposal. We will pick this up tomorrow morning at 10. And at that point, take up motions, consider the restorations with the funds with Kathy and Liam, and do all of that. We have one item still to go, folks. Thanks, Maureen. Thanks, Anne. Thanks, Bill. Jill, we're going to run through very quickly. Jill Murray Grady, NPS General Counsel, is here for a quick update on the vaccination policy that we skipped over earlier. Emphasis on the quick update.
Yes, I think Jill, was a memo shared from
Yes, it was.
Superintendent. Sorry, I apologize. I was tardy. During the 2021-22 school year, at the beginning of the school year, we entered into an agreement with the Newton Teachers Association and subsequently with the Newton Educational Secretaries Association, as well as the custodians, regarding vaccinations for COVID-19 at the time, essentially requiring a vaccination. We instituted a policy as a result in conjunction with those agreements, requiring our employees to be vaccinated or be granted an exemption for medical, religious, other reasons. And this applied to all employees, not just those that were in the unions. And that policy was enacted the beginning of 21-22 school year. It did have a sunset clause at the time at the end of the year because, well, everything was unknown, right? In COVID, things changed very quickly. Later in that year, around February or March, the city had entered into agreements with some of their employees, union employees, regarding these payments, incentive stipends for agreement to a similar vaccination policy, and extended that benefit to school employees. As a result, we renegotiated the terms of the MOA in exchange for that stipend for employees that were in compliance with the policy, that essentially the policy would not have a sunset clause and it would stay in perpetuity until the school committee essentially votes to sunset it. In the meantime, federal, state, and local government have all essentially pulled back their state of emergencies for COVID-19 effective May 11th, 2023. That includes the city of Newton, state of Massachusetts, and federally. And a lot of those required vaccination policies are going away with the removal of the declaration of state of emergency. So this is before the school committee, in light of all those changes that have happened since just about a year plus ago, when the policy, essentially, the term of it was renegotiated with the unions. Mayor Fuller?
Could I just build on what Jill said? In addition to that, if our Commissioner of Health and Human Services, Linda Walsh, was here, she would agree with everything Jill said. And I think she would add one more thing, is thankfully our knowledge has leapfrogged and the science has leapfrogged in the sense that when we were doing the vaccination policy, we now have tests, readily available at-home tests. We now understand a lot more about masking. The therapeutics have arrived, and if you get ill, there's something to turn to. And I would say we've all it's become deeply ingrained and acceptable, I believe, about staying home if not feeling well. So this President Biden, Governor Healy, we're following their lead for May 11th, and that's the bottom line reason why we felt very comfortable shifting at this time.
Thank you.
Right. Jill?
So essentially, it's on the agenda for the school committee to discuss and potentially vote on sunsetting the policy. I don't know if they prefer to do it on May 11th or at the end of the school year, but that would be my recommendation, is one of those dates. And so I don't know if you have any more questions or discussions. Questions? Oh,
I'll
Mayor
just
Fuller.
mention, there's a nice ring lining up with the federal government and the state government. The other thing is that as we begin hiring for next year, people are beginning to do interviews. Having it shift may be advantageous in your hiring process, possibly. Yeah, that certainly was part of our thinking.
Yeah, I'm leaving it up to the committee to make a decision on the date. Paul, did you have a question?
I was just going to say, I don't see why we wouldn't do May 11th, truthfully, for that, May 8th.
No, for the, that's when
Good day.
the hour is late. So the question is, are we set up for a motion tonight, or is that? I think Lisa, usually while I don't think there's more information to be had or asked, traditionally we have discussed changes to policies and then came back at a later date and voted on it. So I think today is just introducing it. And if there's any questions or follow-up to be had, we can put it on the agenda for our next meeting and maybe quickly just vote. And
So that'd be for Thursdays. We'd probably just add it to the consent agenda for the May 11th date.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Can I ask? quickly-
Yes, sure.
Just
Go
one
ahead,
quick
Chris.
related question. Is the medical advisory group still in effect, or has that officially disbanded?
I believe it's disbanded, but I'm not the authority on that. It's disbanded.
We haven't used them for a while.
I know that. I had just had thought about it recently, and
Good
I
question.
wasn't aware of any
I'm quite sure it's no
official
longer
dissolvement of it.
together.
It was not a creation of the school committee. It was a creation of the superintendent's office. So,
Our last meeting was August.
Yep.
And at that point, I think you will remember, we didn't put any additional mandates or.
I'm not
we sent
suggesting
that out to.
they should be meeting right now to discuss anything. I'm just saying from like, is there anything we need to do to say like officially? that's
Usually
disbanded?
thank them.
Yeah, I think
properly.
since it was a creation of the superintendent, I don't think the school committee needs to act to disband it or anything.
Thank you, Jill. Thank you very much. So with that, we've concluded the posted business for tonight's meeting. Our next meeting will be tomorrow morning, April 25th at 10 a.m. We will continue our FY24 budget discussions. Thereafter, our next regular meeting will be on Thursday, April 27th. Thank you to our central staff and a big thanks to everyone who attended tonight. We appreciate it. Our meeting is adjourned.